Hello, and welcome to this tutorial for how to route VE Pro within Pro Tools. I might repeat myself a couple times because I know this can be very confusing, especially if it's the first time you've ever done it. So first, this is our VE Pro server that hosts all of our instances of VE Pro. We're going to start by creating a string section. So, okay, here's your string section, and that pulls up a window that looks like this. Alright, so in this window we have a master bus that I prefer not to use, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it because I'm going to have my instruments come through 4 separate channels. So I'm going to go ahead and add a plugin. So you can do that down here, or you can also do it at the top under channel, add plugin. So I'm going to go ahead and create a stereo version of Contact. Make sure if you haven't seen my previous video on routing Contact in Pro Tools that you see that first, because I'm going to kind of go through this quick. You'll notice that I have all my outputs like we did in the last video, and I'm just going to add a quick string section just like last time. Okay, now I'm going to make sure my outputs are right, stereo 3 and stereo 4, and that part is set. Okay, good. Alright, so what's cool about VE Pro is you have your mixer and your instrument tab just right down at the bottom. You'll notice though that I only have one auxiliary input channel, and I want 4 so that I can individually control all 4 of my instruments. So I can either do that here by adding an input. I can also do it at the bottom by adding an input. If I do that though, I gotta make sure that it's routed the right way. So I go here to Contact and choose stereo 2. Okay, you'll notice that this one doesn't have an option to change the input. That's because it's automatically set to stereo 1. Okay, another quick way is just to hit this plus button, which will automatically set up our inputs to stereo 3 and stereo 4. You also notice that all 4 of these channels are coming out, output 1 and 2. We also want to change this so that they're all separate. So we'll switch this to output 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7 and 8. And so far, so good. Alright, now we're going to switch to Pro Tools and get that set up. Okay, so we're going to start by adding an aux track. And we're going to make 4 of these for each of the instruments. And this is pretty similar to what we did with Contact, just we're going to do it with VE Pro. So we'll label this violin, viola, cello, and bass. Okay. And we'll also rename these violin, viola, cello, and bass. It's important to keep these named right because it gets a little bit confusing later on, so we want to make sure that they're labeled correctly. Okay, so we'll go back to Pro Tools. Oh, and I think I messed that up, so I'm going to go ahead and change this to bass, and that one just to cello. Okay, so now I'm going to add an instance of VE Pro, similar to what I did in the last video with Contact. Oh, first though, I'm going to create 4 MIDI tracks. Otherwise, we won't get any sound at all. Okay, and you know, I'm going to go ahead and label these as well. And you know, I'll just rename these as violin MIDI. That's the easiest way to do it. There we go. Okay, so now after we have all these labeled correctly, we are going to add an instance of VE Pro on our first auxiliary track. Okay. So go down to Instrument and VE Pro. Notice that there's also Vienna Instruments and Vienna Ensemble. We want to use Vienna Ensemble Pro. Okay, and it will pull up a window that looks like this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and connect to our instance of VE Pro. And there it is, the string section. So I'm going to click on that. And there we go, we're connected. So here we can also change the latency. And if we want a low latency, that's usually better. We can also decouple it, and I'm going to do that. When you have it decoupled, that just means that when you save Pro Tools, it won't save your instance of VE Pro. If you want that, you can go ahead and leave that coupled. The reason I like it decoupled is because I usually have the same VE Pro instance for multiple projects, and so I don't want to change my instruments too much. Okay. So this next part can get a little confusing. So we got to make sure that in VE Pro we understand the signal flow. So here on this first track, you'll notice that there's no input. And on the other ones, on viola, cello, and bass, we have stereo 2, 3, and 4. The first one is just assumed to have stereo 1. And it will be the same once we get set up here. There's no input on that. Really, that just means that it's set to stereo 1 and 2, or output 1 and 2. So this one, we have to make sure is matching what we have in VE Pro. Outputs 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and 8. Okay. So we're going to go back to Pro Tools and make sure those match. So we'll go to Plugin and output 3 and 4 for this first one. And we'll do the same thing for cello and bass. So output 5 and 6. We can also use the hotkey command, Shift Option Command, and click to put them all in sequence, which is really nice if you're doing a lot of them. There we go, that's all set up. So let's go ahead and we'll try this out, make sure that it's connected. You'll notice that I'm playing, but I'm not getting any sound. And that is because we need to set up our MIDI channels first. So you'll notice that there's 8 of these here. Those represent MIDI cables. In the old days, a MIDI cable would hold up to 16 channels. So you have 1 through 16. So we're going to go ahead and connect to the first MIDI cable, channel 1, for our first one. Now, although it's set up in Pro Tools, we need to make sure that the same MIDI cable is assigned in VE Pro, and that's found up here. You'll notice that it's set to Omni, which means all. We really want it to be set to MIDI cable 1. So I went ahead and changed that, and we'll leave the channel on Omni since we're going to be using multiple channels. Okay. Alright, let's go back to Pro Tools. And let's check to make sure this is working. Okay, so that's on channel 1. Alright, let's play a couple notes. Now we just have to make sure that the viola, cello, and bass are also set up. So we're going to use the quick command, Shift Option Command, to set those up in sequence. And, yep, there we go. Okay, so that works. Cello works, and the bass works. Perfect. So, sad enough, that's the easy part. And now we're going to get into the more complicated. Was when you add more than one instances of contact in VE Pro. Okay, so we're going to go back to VE Pro. Now, we're going to assume that our first instance of contact is completely full, because we can't have 16 channels. So we're going to pretend that those are full, and we're going to create a new batch of 16. Let's create a brass section. Okay, so I'm going to add French horns, trumpet, trombone, and tuba. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before, make sure their outputs are labeled correctly as stereo 1, 2, 3, and 4. And once that's set up, we're good to go back to this screen. Okay, so you'll notice I have those 4 stereo outputs as 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I want to make sure that this one continues that sequence with 9 and 10. And I also need to make sure I have 4 auxiliary channels. Right now I only have 1 for that, so I'm going to create 3 more. And we'll make sure that they're in the right outputs, and they are. So you notice there's 2 options here. We have the violin and contact 5. We just got to make sure that we're connected to the right instance of contact. So right now it's labeled as contact 5, 1, and those are our stereo outputs. When I was first learning this, I was confused and I thought, oh, well, I already used stereo 2 through 4, so I'm going to start with 5. But remember, this is a new instance of contact, so we're going to start over from 1. And we're going to make sure that these outputs are all in sequence as well, because we want individual control of each instrument. Okay, so now we have all that set up, and now we're going to go back to Pro Tools. Yep, that's all looking good. Okay, back to Pro Tools. Alright, so now we're going to create 4 new auxiliary tracks, and we're going to label them. So French horn, trumpet, yeah, trumpet. Sorry, my brain is like dead today. I think trombone and tuba. Sorry about that. Okay. Now I'm going to make 4 new MIDI tracks and label them as well. Horn, trumpet, trombone, and tuba. So now we're going to go through the same process we did before and connect the right outputs. So I'm going to go ahead and use the quick command to do that. And I think I need to select... Oh, whoops. Okay, well, I got these other ones. 11 through 16. There we go. Okay, so now we need to set up our MIDI channels so that they correspond to the right tracks in VE Pro. So I'm going to go here. Okay, so here's where it can get a little confusing. Notice we're going to pretend that we've used all 16 of those instruments on that MIDI cable. So we're going to have to go to the next MIDI cable for this next group of instruments. So yeah, because we only can have 16 per cable. So we're going to go ahead and instead of selecting A, we're going to go to B1 and set these up in sequence through B2 through 4. Okay. So now we just have to make sure that this instance of contact is set to MIDI cable B or MIDI cable 2. And remember, each MIDI cable carries 16 channels of MIDI. Now don't get this confused in contact, because contact also has MIDI cables. And we'll see here, there's A, B, C, and D. We're always just going to use A. I believe the other ones are for, like, if you have an external keyboard or something. I'm not sure. I haven't actually ever used them. So just make sure those are on A. And we should have sound. Yep, there's our French horn, trumpet, our trombone, and our tuba. Okay, so those are working. And they are coming out the right channel, so we did that right. Okay, so now we're going to add something just to make it a little bit more complicated. We're going to add some woodwinds, but we're going to pretend like our woodwinds are installed on a different computer, or that VE Pro session got too full. So here I created another instance called woodwinds, and which is really nice about VE Pro is I could have those woodwinds on a totally different computer and connect to them through the network. So, or you can also just have 2 instances on the same computer if you were completely full of instruments on the first one. So we're going to go ahead and open this second one, woodwinds, and do the same thing. So we'll delete that master bus, and we're going to go ahead and add an instance of contact, and we're going to add some woodwinds. So we're going to add piccolo, flute, clarinet, and bassoon. So we're just going to go ahead and set up these outputs just like we did before. Make sure that's stereo output 2, stereo out 3, and stereo out 4. And actually, you know what? I'm going to make sure, I'm going to have the flutes come out the same stereo output. So I'm going to change these. Often you'll have, if you have like 2 sets of clarinets, you'll have them come out the same output, because really you just want one output of clarinets. So I'm going to name that flutes, rename this one clarinets, and this last one bassoon. Okay, and you notice those are already set up to have the right input from contact. stereo out 2 and 3. So now we just need to do the same thing here. We need to create 3 new aux tracks and 4 MIDI channels. Remember, 3 aux tracks because the piccolo and the flute are going to share one, and the other ones will just have their own. Okay, so this one's clarinet and bassoon. Okay, I'll make sure I label these MIDI tracks as well. Oops. Okay, flute, clarinet, and bassoon. Alright, so this is where it can get a little confusing. So instead of going to the violin VE Pro and connecting to output 7 and 18, we're actually going to create a new instance of VE Pro. We're going to assume that those are all full anyway, so we're going to go add another instance of VE Pro and connect it to our woodwinds instance, which could be on a different computer or it could be on the same one. Doesn't matter. Just wherever we have our samples saved. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that these are all set to the right outputs. So let's go to VE Pro and you go to the mixer window. Oh, this is wrong. We should be in the other. Yep, here we go. Okay, we got to make sure that these outputs are set right. We didn't change that yet. So here's output 1 and 2. This needs to be 3 and 4, and this needs to be 5 and 6. Okay, so alright, we're gonna go back to Pro Tools and then connect those to the corresponding ones. So remember, this one doesn't have an input because it's automatically set to 1 and 2. And this one is going to be set to flutes, not violins. So, because that's our other one. And flutes 3 and 4. And flutes 5 and 6. The only reason it's called flutes is because of our aux track is named flutes aux. We could rename that if we wanted to, just to help us keep them straight. And you notice here, this is where it gets a little confusing because there's 2 sets of everything. You got to know what each number and letter means. So this middle number is the important one. The middle number explains which instance of VE Pro you're referring to. So the first one will be our violins and our brass, and the second one will be our woodwinds because that's the order which we put them in. The first number and the letter are just redundant. So that refers to each MIDI cable. So MIDI cable A or MIDI cable 1. You can see once you have 5 or 6 instances of VE Pro that this can get really confusing because you have 5 VE Pro port A's. So that middle number becomes very important to know which one you're dealing with. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and connect it to VE Pro instance 2, port A, channel 1. And we're going to do that in sequence for all of those. Okay, so MIDI channel or port A on 2. Okay, so that's set to 1 through 4. So now when we play, we will get sound. Flutes, and you notice the piccolo and the flute are coming out the same one, which is what we wanted. And then clarinet and bassoon. Great, so that's working just how we wanted it to. If you ever have an issue, you got to make sure that you can see audio playing in each area of your instruments. So we have it here in VE Pro. If we go to Pro Tools, we should see it on the MIDI notes and also on the aux track. And this will help you find where you might have misconnected something. If you're seeing it in one area and not in the other, that's an issue. So notice here, oh wait, this is the wrong one. Let's see. Oh, okay, this is the right. Okay, so there we can see the bassoon, and if we open up Contact, we can see that the bassoon. Oh, it's the wrong one. Yeah, the bassoon is receiving a signal, which is what we wanted to check. Okay, so there you go. There you have it. This is the end of the tutorial for how to route VE Pro within Pro Tools using Contact. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video or would like to see more. Also check out our new video on creating a film score template. We'll be using all that what we learned with the Contact 5 video and this VE Pro video. It gets a little bit more complicated, so make sure you watch the videos in sequence. Thanks for watching, and until next time.